Hello, everyone. Welcome to our monthly Hazardous Webinar series. This is a series where we take a closer look at one of the research projects in Natural Hazards Research Australia's portfolio of research, including the project's findings and how it will be translated into practice. We're joined by members of the project team and by people who will use the research. And the focus of today's webinar is on predictive maps. My name's Blythe McLennan. I'm one of the Node Research Managers at Natural Hazards Research Australia, and it is my pleasure to be chairing the webinar for you today. I want to begin with an acknowledgement that we are meeting today on a range of different Aboriginal lands. I'm coming to you from beautiful Wurundjeri country in southeastern Victoria, and I'd like to encourage you to acknowledge the country you're joining us from in the Q&A bar as well. So I pay my respects to elders, past, present and emerging, of all the lands on which we collectively live, work and learn, and recognise that these lands and waters have always been places of teaching, research and learning, and that sovereignty is not being ceded. A few points of housekeeping before we launch into the webinar proper. So today's panel will be recorded, and a link to it and presentation materials will be made available in coming weeks on our website and also emailed to everybody who's registered for today. Please let us know if you have any technical problems. You can add the details in the Q&A function at the bottom of the screen. We have a team on hand who can help you troubleshoot any issues you have during the webinar. I will be answering questions at the end of a formal panel presentation, so please feel free to add questions in the Q&A panel at any time. If the question is for one or other of our speakers, please let us know who it's for so we direct it to the right place for you. And we'll have about 15 minutes at the end to answer your questions. So it is my great pleasure to introduce today's panel. We have two speakers for you. First up, we have Dr. Erica Kuligowski. Erica is an ARC Future Fellow and Principal Research Fellow in the Engineering School at RMIT University. So she studies evacuation and emergency communications in hazard events. Erica has a PhD in sociology and a master's and bachelor's degrees in fire engineering, and she's led post-disaster research studies of response and recovery in bushfires, floods, cyclones, and severe weather events. At RMIT, Erica leads hazard-related research projects, including being a co-lead on the project we're here to learn about today, which is another project examining community experiences of the 22-23 floods in Victoria, South Australia and southwestern New South Wales, and another studying how residents and tourists make decisions about evacuation during bushfires in high-risk areas. Dr. Chloe Begg has what I consider a very important role within the ecosystem of applied research, which is one of a boundary spanner or knowledge broker. So Chloe has a PhD in human geography with a focus on collaborative disaster risk management and a passion for knowledge translation. So she's worked in academia for over 10 years and now has a role at Victoria's Country Fire Authority where she's been for 4 years. And in that role, she works in that messy but really intriguing space between research and practice. So Chloe leads and contributes to a number of research projects where she aims to facilitate knowledge sharing and production between researchers and fire agency personnel. Chloe's learnt and continues to learn a lot about what it takes to conduct research that's fit for agency use and about how to encourage and enable evidence-based decision-making within fire agencies. And in the true spirit of being a boundary spanner, in the project we're speaking about today, Chloe has a sort of a dual role in that she is here from a fire agency and is also a member of the research team. So this is actually the second in our series of hazardous webinars that have looked at findings from this project, which is a predictions in public project. So this is an iterative empirical study that's developing Australia's first evidence-based guidelines for how predictive fire spread maps should be designed and communicated and how and when they should be disseminated to the general public. This project's a collaboration between Natural Hazards Research Australia, Country Fire Authority Victoria, Victorian Department of Education, RMIT University, Queensland University of Technology, Deakin University, Swinburne University of Technology. It's also being delivered through a co-design process with a highly engaged steering committee of fire agency personnel that have roles in public communications and predictive services, So I want to acknowledge the very significant contribution that steering committee makes to this project as well. In our July webinar, we heard about findings from a survey of community perceptions, use and understanding of maps during bushfires. If you missed out on that or would like to watch it again, we'll put a link in the chat in a moment, and we'll also share a link with you via email after the webinar. Today, we're hearing from a complementary package of work within the Predictions and Public project, where Erica and her team interviewed community members in 4 different locations in Australia to find out more about how members of the public understand, use and act on maps during bushfire emergencies, including both incident and fire spread prediction maps. In those 4 locations, Erica and her team got great support from local government staff who assisted them in reaching out to the community. So I just want to acknowledge on behalf of Natural Hazards Australia, their contribution to supporting the work, as well as to thank the people who agreed to be interviewed for it. This kind of research would be much, much harder without having that kind of generous local support. So I want to say thank you. And without any further ado, I'll pass you over to Erica now, who will tell you a bit more about the study and about what she found. Thank you, Erica.
And thank you, Blythe. I will just share my screen. And I just also want to thank you, Blythe and NHRA, for allowing us to come and do this webinar on behalf of Chloe and I. We're just very excited to be here today to talk about this project, and in particular, our work on community perceptions and understanding of predictive maps. Chloe and I would also like to acknowledge the people of the Eastern Kulin Nation, and in particular, the people of the Wurrung and Boonwurrung language groups. We'd like to pay our respects to elders past, present, and emerging, and acknowledge any First Nations people engaged in the webinar today. We acknowledge the resilience and the strength of the First Nations people, and that sovereignty was never ceded. Before I move on, again, thank you, NHRA, for funding this project, and also our amazing steering committee that Chloe will introduce in a moment. Okay, so let's dive into this. During our interviews, a participant from New South Wales recalled when they were asked about their use of bushfire maps during the 2019-2020 fire season. Yeah, we were kind of living off of them, really. You'd see something, or you'd go around to a neighbor's place and see it from a different angle, and you'd go and check the app again, just trying to get our heads around exactly what happened. We were really living off it. It was used more, those apps were used more than the phone feature of the phone over those days. So maps are an important way to communicate spatial information, and they're increasingly being distributed and used in natural hazards like bushfires. I have a number of different maps on the screen, just some examples of fire incident maps, fire spread prediction maps, forecast wind maps, etc. So the use of maps, and in particular fire spread prediction maps, and those display the likely spread of fire over time, they've become an important topic of for different fire and emergency services agencies across Australia. However, no evidence-based guidelines exist on how predictive maps should be designed and communicated, as well as how they should be disseminated to the public. So I'll turn it over to Chloe for a moment to discuss the background, aims, and our project team.
Thanks, Erica. So we know that there's a lot of expectation from the public regarding the use of these maps during an emergency. They're useful to get an understanding of the risk that they face and what sort of actions they should be taking to protect themselves. We also know that there are technological advancements within fire agencies and the ability to be able to produce such predictive maps during an emergency. And we have had many reviews and inquiries, royal commissions that have recommended again and again that we need to improve our early warnings in order to be able to support improvements to public safety. There's also been some political pressure, and this project is really focused on the role of predictions as a potential way to improve public information during an emergency. And when these maps, so there's an example on your screen right now of a so-called red map that was released in New South Wales during the 2020-2019 bushfires. And after this incident in particular, a lot of jurisdictions were asking questions about whether they should be also producing such products during emergencies. And we did some research in Victoria that asked emergency services staff to reflect on the role of predictions. And we did find that there was support across the agencies for the use of predictions in public communication during an emergency, but there were lots of concerns around how do we embed this within our existing tools, such as the incident warning maps, and when do we use them, under what scenarios, and how should they be released, and when should they be released to the public. So this project really aims to provide a space to collaborate and to develop an evidence base that supports a consistent national approach to the future use of public-facing predictive fire spread maps during an emergency. And the way we have gone about doing this is that we have a really large team that both Erica and Blythe have alluded to. So I'm one of the coordinators together with Angela Gardner, and we have a large research team that represents 4 universities from across Australia. We have people who have expertise in risk communication, cardiography, evacuation, behaviour and modelling, anthropology and organisational learning. But we also have a very large steering committee. So the reason that this project was funded is because we had endorsement from the national AFAC groups, the Predictive Services Group and the Warnings Group. And we're really lucky that we have representation from both groups, from all jurisdictions across Australia, in addition to representation from the Bureau of Meteorology. And this group has been fantastic in the project. We meet every 2 weeks. We work together. So it's all about the research. We have a research question and we go over here in our universities and answer it. We really work together with the steering committee to discuss the design of the research. What are our assumptions? What are we actually trying to achieve? What are the barriers or some of the considerations that relate to our ability to be able to produce these maps? And how do we sort of use the research that we have to be able to get some really good evidence that allows us to make decisions about these products in the future. So we're designing the products or designing the research together, but we're also coming together when we're discussing the implications of that research together in terms of what it means for current practice and how we use the studies coming up to get a better understanding of public comprehension and potential use of these products into the future. And the way we've designed the project is in 3 phases. So the first phase, it's really important that we understand the current status quo in terms of current agency practice and community comprehension and use of existing public-facing map products during an emergency. We don't want to go off and develop predictions without taking into consideration the ecosystem of information that already exists and what the role of these predictions might be or might best be in the future. So this research is, and this is the research part of it that Erica will be presenting today, is really that baseline. It's so important. It allows us to understand what communities are expecting, what they need, and how they use these products, so that we can move into phase 2 with a better understanding of what it is we need to be testing. So phase 2 is really about developing these new maps or these predictions and testing a range of different map concepts to see which ones test the best or have the best outcomes in terms of risk understanding and intention to act to protect oneself during an emergency. And then we have phase 3, which is also really important, and I think we're quite lucky in this project to have it. It's the implementation. So we're not doing the research, writing a report that sits on somebody's desk, and then as the project is finished, we have phase 3, which is really about working with our steering committee to develop and to identify and develop practical outputs that can translate this research into agency practice and policy. So thanks, Erica. I'll hand back to you to talk a little bit more about the webinar.
Great. Thank you so much, Chloe. Thank you for that excellent introduction. And just to echo what Blythe said, I really do encourage you to take a look at this the previous webinar from Paula Dutzen at QUT, Amy Griffin at RMIT, and Deanna Pulela from DFES at WA that really talked about some of the quantitative findings from phase 1, the next steps for the project, and how this research can be used by fire agencies. And so I know that Blythe said that she would share the link to the recording, so that's really great news. So let's dig into the project that Chloe and I are presenting today, and this is on the community interviews. And so the research question was, how do community members with bushfire experience understand, use, and take action in response to existing bushfire maps? So both incident maps and fire spread prediction maps. And so to do this, we spoke with 94 participants in between November of 2022 into April of 23 across 3 locations. So Cardinia Shire, Victoria, Snowy Monaro Regional Council in New South Wales and Southern ACT was one trip as well. That's 2 locations in one. And then Huon Valley, the Huon Valley in Tasmania. And so the interviews had 2 different parts. So part 1, we asked people, and so we specifically recruited people with previous experience of recent fire events. And so the events are listed on the screen there. And so part 1 was just talking about their previous experience with that recent fire event. And we asked a series of questions, including their experiences with information and use of maps during that event. How did they respond to the fire, and potentially the role of maps in their response, and their perspectives on map utility. And then we also had the second part of our interview, where participants were shown 2 or 3 different types of maps and accompanying warning information where applicable, that displayed a location in their state. And for each map, we walk through a series of questions, asking people about the information they obtained from the map, asking them to walk through the different elements on the map and what did they mean to them, what captured their attention first, where were the highest areas of highest risk of harm, what were the appropriate responses for people in those different areas, and then suggestions for improvement, among other questions. And in most places, so in Cardinia Shire, New South Wales and ACT, they saw an incident map and a predictive map. And then in Tasmania, they saw 2 incident maps. So I'll dig into the results now. But before I do, I just want to do another set of thank yous. Blythe already did this, which I'm very appreciative of. But I would also, Chloe and I would like to thank the residents of Cardinia Shire, Huon Valley, Southern ACT, and Snowy Monaro Regional Council. Please know, hopefully you're listening today to the webinar, or you'll listen to the recording, your voices were heard. And so we took all of your great feedback and implemented that into phase 2 of the maps that are being tested now. Thank you also to the steering committee for our project for connecting us with our study locations. And then thank you so very much to local councils and the local fire agency units for helping us get the word out about our study, helping us with recruitment, finding places to hold interviews, and so much more. And then also thank you to our local media that got the word out about our interviews and also about the findings after our project was completed. So a bit about our sample. It comprised 50% male-female, pretty much across the board. It's the sample skewed a bit slightly older across all of our locations. And the majority of our participants held a minimum of a bachelor's degree and were frequent users of all types of maps, not just bushfire maps. They had experience with bushfires even prior to the event we were talking to them about, with 40% who had experienced at least 5 bushfires prior to 2019, and at least 60% that had evacuated at least one time. And so digging into the results now, a large majority, this is focused primarily on part 1 right now, a large majority of participants used maps during their fire experience. And they used maps from a variety of different platforms, and this is focused on fire-related maps. And so across all 3 locations, a lot of participants told us about their use of maps from fire and emergency services websites and apps. They also mentioned Digital Earth Australia, or DEA Hotspots map as a popular one, Google Maps, the Bureau of Meteorology, and then 2 of our 3 locations mentioned the Windy app. Also, across all 3 locations, people mentioned the importance of the community meetings and the maps shown at the community meetings. And a lot of our participants in New South Wales and ACT highlighted bushfire IO as something that they looked at quite frequently, as well as people on the border of Victoria also downloading Vic Emergency app and using that during the events. And participants use maps sometimes up to 20 to 50 times a day for a number of different purposes. I'll go through each of these and then provide a couple of quotes to support some of these as examples. So first, the first purpose that people use maps to self-localize or to identify where they were in relation to the bushfire. People also use maps to gather information about the fire event and what to do. They were also monitoring the extent or rate of spread using the burnt area shown on the maps. Participants were also using mapped information to cross-reference that with other sources. They were using maps to confirm or explain the physical cues that they were seeing around them. So for example, smoke or emergency response crews or vehicles responding to the fire event. Another reason was to make judgments about how the fire might spread or the level of risk to themselves or their loved ones. People were also using maps to inform or warn others who may be at risk. So people were screenshotting, so for example, a map in Vic Emergency and putting that on social media or sending that through their WhatsApp groups. People were also monitoring the impact of the fire using maps on their or others' property, even after they had evacuated. So it was sort of a way to monitor what was going on the ground and see if their home had been impacted by the fire or if their neighbors or loved ones' properties. And an example from someone in Tasmania about using the map to self-localize, this person said, the best map that I actually started looking at was at the DEA hotspot map of Australia. And that was fantastic because I could really drill in and actually see where the fires are in relation to our property, because we were never really sure about how close they were and wind direction. And of course, fires can move pretty quick. And then someone from New South Wales ACT that we spoke with noted that for cross-referencing map information with other sources, they said, I get notified if there's a fire within 50 or 60 Ks of me, and I look at it, and then I look at the bomb, and I see where the wind's coming from, and then I look back at the fire map, and I spent a lot of time on the fire maps, actually, and I spent a lot of time checking it against the wind and the predicted wind direction. But even though maps were very well used across our sample, maps were seen as one tool in a box of many information sources. So someone from Tasmania noted to us, it was again this on and off routine. And you ended up being quite obsessed in the end of checking alerts, checking maps, listening to the ABC, phoning everybody, messaging everybody. So people spoke with us about a number of different ways that they were looking for information or receiving information, maybe radio, informal and formal networks, warnings, etc. And in part one, continuing on with people's experiences with fires, they also talked to us about challenges with maps. One challenge being the difficulty ascertaining whether mapped information was up to date or not. And so a participant from New South Wales ACT said, I felt like if I went to the Windy app, that was really current. And then sometimes I'd be looking at the Fires Near Me app or the Emergency Services one, and I'd be like, is this old? Has this actually changed since this has been updated? Or is this up to date? I do think that I had feelings about how much can I trust this information? There was also challenges with missing information. So if people felt that there was information that they wanted to see, but it wasn't on the map, or inconsistent information. So information that wasn't consistent across different sources or channels, or if they perceived or had confirmation that the map information was inaccurate. That was also challenging for people, caused confusion and potential delays. There was also inaccessibility of information due to maybe lack of internet or lack of coverage. Also, it could be the device they used didn't provide them access to maps, or of course, comprehension issues were also challenging. But there were also positive feedback that we received from our participants as well. They gave a number of kudos to New South Wales ACT for disseminating predictive maps during the 2019-2020 bushfire season, and certainly the Black Summer fires. They also had positive things to say about the Bureau of Meteorology predictions, as well as the Vic Emergency app. And then across all 3 locations, participants were telling us about the importance of those community meetings to help them to better understand what the maps were saying, as well as how the maps were created and the policies around them. So someone in Victoria noted to us, there were daily community meetings after that point. So we probably got a better understanding after we've had a couple of those sessions where they explained how the maps were being updated, because I guess you expect them to be like real-time updates on the map. Once we had that explained to us a few times, it was like, okay, well, you can't. And then going into part 2 of our results now to discuss some comprehension issues. And so as I mentioned before, we showed everyone in our sample or participants at least one incident map. And so I want to talk a little bit about the comprehension issues that our participants had with the incident maps or the warning or the polygon maps. And so the first is the confusion around the triangle symbols, and in particular, the meaning of the triangle's locations. And so this is a quote from a participant from New South Wales ACT talking about the triangle's location. And they said, I'm assuming that's where it's burning, but I think before I thought about it a little bit more, I thought maybe that's where the original fire was, like where it started. But I've kind of changed my mind on that after reading that they're burning in an easterly direction. Also in Tasmania, a majority of the participants thought that the triangle identified the fire's location. So most assumed that it was the starting location. Some assumed it was the most active fire location, and others were uncertain. So they maybe thought initially it was a location, and then they saw the legend. There were also some other issues with comprehension in Tasmania about what the polygon itself represented. And there was confusion about whether or not it represented the extent or the size of the fire. And so in Tasmania, everyone saw map 1 first, answered a series of questions, and then they saw map 2. And someone in Tassie said to us after seeing map 2, oh, now I understand. That was actually the emergency warning area versus the watch and act area. And I've totally misunderstood it, related to map 1, as fire extent. And in Victoria, even though I'm not showing the incident map on the screen, only a few of our participants thought that the warning polygons outlined the size or the extent of the fire. Digging in a little bit and focusing on Victoria for a moment, Victorian participants also viewed a third map. And so they viewed a Vic emergency map that adds an extreme heat advisory to the bushfire warning polygon. And so Victoria participants were asked what they noticed on this map and about the different elements and what they meant to them. And so only a few of the participants in Victoria linked that yellow polygon semantically with an extreme heat advisory. Most interpreted the area, that yellow polygon, as the predicted fire zone, or an area without flooding, or a flood warning, or a location of a state forest. And so someone in Victoria said that, yeah, it means that there's not a fire. It just means to me it's stable. And it's very clear to me. It's got shades of green where I guess there are more trees and green areas. And then for those who linked the yellow polygon with a heat advisory, some were confused about how extreme heat can be localized to just one specific area within a larger region. So someone said to us, it's unusual to have an extreme heat day there, so pointing to a location within the yellow polygon, and quite cool conditions here, pointing to a map location just outside of the yellow polygon. It's not very far away. And so one more piece of on the comprehension issues, now focusing on fire spread prediction maps. And so there was some confusion regarding certain areas of these maps and the risks associated with those areas, such as the gray or the burnt area, as well as areas in red on the left-hand side map from New South Wales. The red areas are the potential spread areas. And so let's focus on the New South Wales map first on the left, and let's focus on the red areas first. So I have a quote here on the screen from a participant from New South Wales ACT saying, "I don't have any sense of intensity being different in one area over another," referring to the red areas. And then on that same map, referring to the gray or the burnt areas, someone else told us, "Without knowing the extent of what's burned there and what's actually there could still be some risk." Now, moving over to the Victorian potential impact zone map, Victorian participants had differing perspectives of the risk of the gray areas on that impact, on the impact zone map. So the most common judgment of the gray areas was that it could be burning or it could burn again. People may be at risk of fallen trees or road blockages. And someone in Victoria noted that this is a danger area or danger zone that people should keep out of this location. The minority of Victorian participants, on the other hand, noted that these gray areas or the burnt areas were safe or that they offered refuge from the fire. And so taking it, also focusing on the impact zone map, I just want to focus just for a moment also on that black line, sort of that black outline. Most of our participants in Victoria thought that that line represented a border of some sort or a geographical boundary, for example, maybe of Victoria or of Gippsland, of East Gippsland, a Gippsland firefighting area, or a jurisdictional area of some type. And so a participant from Victoria said, I'm not sure what that black line means because you've got fires in and out. I know that's New South Wales, and so they're referring to that straight black line there and things like that, but I'm not sure what the black one means. And so this yellow box to the right of that map explains the potential impact zone, but not everybody read this or understood it. So overall, I would say across all of our maps, people were seeing very different things looking at the same map. With the time I have left, I just want to dive a little bit more into some of the other results from part 2. And first, the level of confidence in maps. And so people had higher levels of confidence in the mapped information if they had higher levels of trust in the map source. And for a lot of our participants, that was fire and emergency services agencies that they trusted. They also linked higher levels of confidence with higher understanding of the inherent uncertainty in the products. And so if they had an understanding of the uncertainty in mapped products, then they were more likely to have a higher level of confidence in it. And so someone from New South Wales ACT explained that, they're never going to be 100% accurate because you can't predict the weather, you can't predict wind changes, and the fires create their own weather. So they go wild and go in completely different direction. It's just the best guesstimate, really. And so that's just one example of someone trying to sort of understand the inherent uncertainty of mapped products. On the other hand, people had lower levels of confidence if they perceived that the map was outdated or if they thought that it lacked sufficient information or detail. Also, if they had comprehension issues with the map itself, or if they perceived that the map was too general in scale, or if it did not provide localized information. And then regardless of the location that we spoke to, so across all three, participants needed to confirm the map's message with other sources of information. And this is the same with a lot of emergency communication research in hazards and disasters. Confirmation is key to people taking the next step and taking protective action. And so that's why it's so difficult if messages and information are inconsistent across different map sources and across different channels. That can really cause confusion and delay. And so just as an example, in Victoria, our participants told us that to confirm mapped information, they still wanted to look out the window to confirm event details, or they wanted to look for other sources of information to make sure that the mapped information was consistent or maybe was accurate. And they also wanted to use their own judgment to confirm the mapped information. And then regardless of map type, all participants requested additional information to help them understand what was going on and take the right action. And so the first set of information that people wanted to see was related to wayfinding and navigation information. And this could help them self-locate, again, helping to understand where they are in relation to the risk. And so here they wanted to see city and town names, landmarks, topographical information, parks and road names, as well as traffic information, road closures, location of refuges, and potential routes for evacuation. People also wanted environmental conditions, so the fire size, its intensity, its activity, including burnt areas, its location over time, its spread and direction. And almost every participant we interviewed, and in fact, even people that I've spoken with in bushfire-prone areas outside of this project, want additional information regarding wind speed and direction. So without that information, people noted that they would just look for it elsewhere. And people also wanted information on emergency response, including the number of responding vehicles, their locations within the affected area, and the areas of intervention. So where are they back burning and the containment lines. And participants also requested additional map features to help improve the use of maps as well as their understanding. So a scale bar, a compass, legend, and certainly increased resolution and clear coloring. And just one sort of caveat here, and we've been speaking with the steering committee at length about this, it is important to understand that while we may want all of this information, it is important to understand on what map type would this information be best. So for example, maybe wayfinding information like route status might be better on more like a localized incident map versus a larger scale statewide prediction map. And just a summary of the findings before I pass it back over to Chloe, a large majority of the participants used maps and for a variety of different purposes, as I've shared with you. There were certainly challenges with maps during fire events and some positive feedback as well. During part 2, there were some comprehension challenges that our team took on board and shared with our steering committee. So that's very important when we're thinking about the design of future maps. And we also talked about the confidence and what were the, under what circumstances people felt more confident or less confident in mapped information. And then we also talked about the different types of information that people wanted to see. People that we spoke with, our participants, welcomed fire spread predictions. They wanted to see those more in fires moving forward. And they also wanted to see information consolidated on one platform. And to conclude, why is information so important? And in particular, why is timely and consistent information so important? So we know that the lack of timely information confuses participants and about the state of the event, about what they could do, what they should do. When information is missing, we know from research and from this research as well that people will fill in the gaps. People will look for it elsewhere, right? And they'll fill in the gaps with their own knowledge and their own experience, which may not always lead to accurate conclusions. And finally, because we know that everyone wants to confirm the information that they receive, inconsistent information across multiple map sources, platforms, and geographical boundaries creates confusion and causes decisions to be delayed. So I'll turn it back to Chloe now to speak about the implications of our findings, some next steps, I'll mute myself and back to you, Chloe.
Thanks, Erica. So you can see we learned a lot. There's a lot in there, and it's fascinating work that Erica and her team have been able to do as part of this research. But I guess the question we have after we've conducted this research and in the research that was presented at the last webinar within this series, what do we do with it? So how do we take this research and take the next step, which is figuring out what it means for current practice and future research, so that research that we'll be doing or are doing in phase 2. So we took the findings of Erica's research and Paula's research and other research conducted in phase 1, and we tried to synthesize that research into what we were considering some kind of decision points. So firstly, we needed to untangle, so what sort of fits within our current products, so our incident warning maps, and where are the gaps that we would like to the things that we would like to further investigate in phase 2. So you can see on the screens a snapshot or a screenshot of our mirror board that we worked with the steering committee on in a series of workshops to try to untangle some of the findings and figure out what the implications are and how we want to move forward. So this was an opportunity for jurisdictions to have a say, to provide input and to endorse the next steps of the research. And importantly, we learned a lot about what people want on the maps, and I guess phase 2 is that opportunity to be able to test a bunch of different map concepts or test elements within the map to see if it actually does result in some improvements to risk comprehension and confident protective actions. So the way that we did it, the way we tried to synthesize and to scope the research, because as you see, it's quite a lot of things that we found, we developed these evidence-based principles. So for that intention to be able to use the research practically, we thought about what are the key decisions that agency staff are going to be needing to take during an emergency to develop these maps, to disseminate these maps and to communicate these maps. And these are the 6 principles we developed together and what we're using phase 2 to create evidence for, to support that consistency across our jurisdictions. So I'll quickly go through them. So principle 1 is about ensuring that there are clear triggers to predictive map production, dissemination, and updates. So under what scenarios are predictions most appropriate? How should they be disseminated? Should it be through social media? And what considerations should we be taking into account? Or should it be community meetings? And how often can we, or should they be updated? How often can they actually be updated? So these are the sorts of things that we're looking for evidence on for principle 1. For principle 2, we're looking to ensure that map readers can understand their location in relation to the hazard, and that the information that we put on the map can support appropriate protective actions. We know if there's too much information on the map, people will become confused. So what do we need to be putting on these maps under different scenarios to make sure that we're using them to their best ability? Principle 3 is about ensuring that maps communicate risk and uncertainty. How should that uncertainty be communicated? Erica showed that people understand that the future is inherently uncertain, and therefore these maps also can have their limitations. But how do we communicate that? Is it verbally or through text, such as through percentage likelihood or probability, or is it through some design elements? And that's what we're testing within that principle. Principle 4 is ensuring that predictive maps complement incident warning maps. So we want the predictions, they shouldn't be calls to action in and of themselves. They should be providing extra information as to why people are under a watch and act or in an emergency area. And principle 5 is about ensuring that the maps are accessible to a wide range of audiences. So making sure that people who experience colour blindness and people from whole communities are able to access these maps. Principle 6 is a really important one. We know that there are cross-border issues. We know from Erica's research that there was confusion when people were on border towns and having to toggle between fires near me and big emergency. And we'll be working with our steering committee to develop some recommendations around creating that authorization environment to be able to disseminate maps in those cross-border situations. And so we took this is a little preview of what we did with the results of Erica's work and other work in phase 1. We took all of those responses from community about what they would like to see on the maps, and we developed, I think it was over 44 maps that we tested with communities across Australia that use these different elements to see, is there a design that is the the winner in terms of being able to improve risk comprehension and intended actions. And so we're right in the middle of phase 2 now. Those maps that you just saw were part of the national survey, and we have a range of other research that we are currently either out in the field conducting or are looking forward to conducting as part of developing that evidence base to support those principles. And as I mentioned before, then once we've finished that research, we're moving into phase 3 and looking to working with our steering committee to develop 2 practical outputs together to inform or translate that research into agency policy and practice. And I'll hand over to Erica now to round up for some concluding remarks.
Thank you, Chloe. And just a bit about our additional resources. So I think there's probably been some links in the chat I haven't been able to see, but if you do want to find out more information about our project, there is a project page for all of our predictions in public work, all of our work packages and things like that. So that's the link for you there. We do have a hazard note that's related to these interviews in particular. So please have a look at that. And there's a link. You could either get to it through the predictions in public page or that link directly on the screen. We have a new journal article coming out just from part 1 of our interviews and within the International Journal of Wildland Fire. And then we have a larger report that NHRA is looking through at the moment that has just a wealth of voices from our participants, direct quotes from their experiences and their interactions with the maps that are so vital to us understanding and moving forward in this work. So hopefully that longer report will be available soon on our project page. Please have a look for that. I'm happy to share that if you would like to email me directly. And I just want to say a thank you to Gita Pupides, Philippa Perry, who did the interviews with me for this work, and Natasha Mondo McCann that did the work with us on the analysis. And so I'll stop us there and say thank you so much again to NHRA, and thank you all for joining us today and listening. We'll look forward to hearing more, your comments, your questions.
Thank you so much, Erica and Chloe. There are so many questions to ask. I can see So we have some time for questions, about 10 minutes, a little bit under 10 minutes. So I'm going to go to a few questions and comments in the chat, and then I have a list of questions to get to if we have time that I noted down through the presentation. So I want to start with a question from, it's either Stephen or Stefan, so sorry if I've one of those pronunciations, who's talked about, so at the start, Chloe, when you showed the team that's involved in the project, they didn't specifically mention AFAC and Bureau of Meteorology. So Stephen was wondering how they are connected into the research. And then a second part of that is around how, if they are not involved, would that mean that it might limit potential improvement to national level products coming from this project? So if you might want to comment on their involvement, and then also on the potential for this project to contribute or influence to improvements to national level products.
Yeah, great question, Stephen. Thank you. So to the first part of your question about the involvement of AFAC and the Bureau. So the representatives of the steering committee are representatives of the AFAC groups, both the predictive services and the warnings group. And we do present to the AFAC groups more broadly quite regularly. So that's an opportunity to make sure that everybody in those groups is aware of the research and can also provide endorsement and comments to some of the decisions that we're making as part of the project. The Bureau are also involved in the project. So we had Fiona Dunstan on the project team for quite a while, and now we have Vicky Heinrich and Carla Mooney. So that's been really great to have that input as well. In terms of having it as a national product, if I understand your question correctly, I guess that's part of the conversation that we're just starting to have with the steering committee around that Principle 6 cross-border collaboration and authorization of the products. So because it's so widely diverse across all the jurisdictions in terms of the existing warning platforms, and that these products, I guess there's an assumption that they will be owned and produced by those jurisdictions separately. There is that question of how, when it comes to the border, how we deal with that, and how we untangle that and make sure that there is consistency across across jurisdictions, and that's something that we're absolutely trying to untangle now. But if you have any suggestions, I'm really open to that as well. So thank you.
Thanks, Chloe. There's a comment here from Kevin I'm going to dig into a little bit as well, because I know this will have been a topic of conversation through the project and will be moving forward as well, the steering committee. So Kevin's noted that in reports that have heard directly from firefighters in the 2011 Victorian fires and the 2019-20 wildfires, that on extreme days, the fire control centres were overwhelmed in were already overwhelmed. So keeping maps up to date for public use outside of the immediate fire control centre needs was actually impossible under those conditions. And then there's a comment further down relating to that about the potential to use AI to take off pressure of map producers. And so I guess that speaks to this issue of currency and expectations about live maps and frequency of updating on maps, which I know is a key issue being explored in the project. So I might start with maybe Chloe, but then also Erica, from what you found with communities around that, because I know that's going to be something that is going to be an ongoing theme. It's one of those things to untangle through the project.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, two ways to sort of attempt to answer the first part of that. So we know that like the part of the focus of the project is on the research, and what we know is kind of that gold star best practice based on the research that we do within the project in terms of under what scenarios should these maps be used, how should they be disseminated, and how often should they be updated in a perfect world. But then there's also that, how does that actually translate into the real world and our existing resourcing capacity and capability within fire agencies, and what would need to be present in those different jurisdictions to be able to move towards that gold star. So that's how we're trying to, I guess, deal with that. We know that it's an issue, but I guess providing some guidelines and some recommendations for how we might be able to actually achieve this type of product. And then I missed the
AI.
Potential AI.
Yeah, great question. I
Yeah.
will. It's definitely something it's in the periphery at the moment. We haven't really spoken to it as a group, as a topic, but definitely something that we will absolutely be forced to reckon with and to come up with a response to. So I don't have one at the moment, but yeah, it's definitely something that we will be considering.
And I just want to follow up on what Chloe was saying. I think it is a really important discussion to have, and what we've been chatting with our steering committee and what's come out of the interviews is it is all about expectation. And so if it isn't, I think as long as people understand how it works, sort of behind not the nitty-gritty details, but really just an understanding of, okay, this is what needs to go into these maps, and so this is why they can't be real time. And sort of that kind of understanding would then help with the expectations of what, when I'm looking at this, if it's not 100% accurate, or if it's not, in real time, this is why. And I think also people really want to understand timestamps and when does this expire? When was this produced? What is this for? So the more information we can put around timing and expectations and help the public, help all of us understand expectations would be beneficial, because that is agreed. We've been made aware from our steering committee about how busy things can get. And so I think there's something that we can really do here with education and expectations.
Yeah, great answer. I just wanted to acknowledge there's a comment there from someone who's a brigade level community engager. And the comment is that they see great potential to start conversations and build map basics with community. So where people live, etc., that can support and enhance map understanding and interpretation. So building the basics before the maps are out. I think that goes back to your slide, Erica, where you showed the toolbox, and that these maps are one thing in a wider range of toolbox about public communications, warnings, community engagement, that they're not a standalone product, and that their use and interaction with other ways of sharing information and supporting community understanding is going to be very important. So I think that's a really important comment.
Absolutely.
And I think if I could just add to that, that's something that we're also finding in the research as well, and something that I think we understand when you work in this space as a researcher. But I think the importance of community engagement, and not just assuming that you can produce a really well designed map and that that's going to be inherently understood during a very stressful time like an emergency. So being able to have those resources to be able to communicate what those maps mean for people in their particular situation before they see them during an emergency is such a critical part of this. So,
I completely agree. Having something about map basics would be amazing, because just as a reminder, we talk to people who are fairly heavy map users. And so it's really, we want to be able to meet everyone where they are. And so map basics at the community level would be fantastic.
So related a little bit following up to that, and it's a question from Beth in the Q&A. How realistic is it to expect that agencies could provide information about when next updates were happening, given everything else that's happening during an event and all the things that fire agencies are needing to do? Is that kind of certainty to community something that's possible, or what kind of, I guess, what kind of possibilities do you see in including information on maps about, say, next updates and currency, etc.?
That is provided, that is currently provided on the incident warning maps, and it's generally in text. And I guess that's something that we're exploring in this research for predictions, is like, it's how often should they be, or under what conditions should they should an update be triggered. But that information is generally provided, and I guess, Erica, you could speak to what you found in your research, because you mentioned that people didn't necessarily understand that. But so it's about, how do you, if you don't have a statement on the map that says this map is current until X time, or in case the situation, or when the situation changes, is generally the line that's given. But I guess, Erica, I don't know what you found about updates and people's understanding of the accuracy or the timeliness of the warnings or the maps.
Well, I think we focus primarily on sort of what people were seeing when they were looking at the maps, and even some of the maps that had sort of information about next updates. It needs to be fairly obvious and what that means. And I just think, especially in a time, like you said, that is very stressful, it's not that everyone's picking up on some of these things that are included on the maps. And maybe it depends on where it's located, how large it is, if people are picking up on that and if they know what that means or not. So I think I don't have a great answer for that, Chloe. I just know that people want to be able to understand when the maps are updated, but whether or not they were picking up on the statements and where they were located, I'm not quite sure.
Thanks, Erica. Now with a look at time, because we're just about time to come to a close. That's all the questions we have time for. But just to let you know, I will pass on, there's some comments come through in the Q&A that I'll pass on to Erica and Chloe to make sure they have them. So I just want to say Thank you, Erica and Chloe, and thank you to everyone who's joined us today online as well. And just to reiterate, we will send links to the webinar recording from today and the July webinar recording as well, presentation materials and reports and links for the project and for our upcoming hazardous webinars as well. That will be in the next 1 to 2 weeks. We have plenty of online and in-person events coming up, so I just wanted to flag a few with you. The Disaster Challenge final is taking place on Friday, 4th of October. If you don't know what the Disaster Challenge is, have a look at it. It's a really fun initiative that the centre has. And we have 3 teams of undergraduates and postgraduates and early career researchers who are pitching ideas on how to build trust and reduce the risk and impacts of disasters in a final to a judging panel. So that's a really fun event coming up. That's going to be in Perth. Next month, we're also hosting a special online event to mark International Day for Disaster Risk Reduction, and that's with the Australian Institute of Disaster Resilience. And in October, our next hazardous webinar is focusing on a project that has looked at awareness, education and communication for compound natural hazards, led by Dr Gabby McCarter and a team at Deakin University. So thematically related to this one, a lot of focus on communication at the moment. So for updates on everything related to Natural Hazards Research Australia and our research portfolio like this project, please sign up to our newsletter and follow us on social media where we're very active. So thank you again, and thank you, Erica and Chloe, everyone for attending, and we'll see you next time.